This day is called Eid al-Adha, which means the Eid of sacrifice. Another name is Yawmun Nahar, the day of Nahar. Nahar also means the sacrifice of animals. And it's also known as Eid al-Qurban. And we know what Qurbani is, means sacrifice. So this is what this Eid is all about. It's about sacrificing an animal in the path of Allah Ta'ala. And this is the most important act of this day. So everything else that we do, for example, we wear good clothes, we come to the Eid namaz, we have good food. These are all secondary to this day. The main purpose of this day is the Qurbani. And we must do the Qurbani on this day. This is the most important act. The Prophet ﷺ said that there's no deed beloved to Allah Ta'ala on this day except the Qurbani. This is the most important thing you can do. And that's why it's said that you should pray this Eid namaz early, as early as possible. And in the old countries, they used to pray very, very early, straight after Fajr namaz, straight after sunrise. So people get busy with the Qurbani, so they're not distracted. So all this stuff you see about, about people having entertainment or going to fun fairs, whatever, that's wrong because it distracts you from your true purpose of this day, which is to make sure you do the Qurbani. The Qurbani is the main purpose of this day, and this is what your focus should be on. For example, on Eid al-Fitr, we're happy. That's a day of happiness for us. We express our joy with good food, by eating, by wearing good clothes, because we've done something before that. We did the month of Ramadan, we fasted, so that's our reward. On this Eid, we haven't done anything before this, have we? It's just come about. Today is the day that you do the deed, and that is a Qurbani. And the Prophet ﷺ said that the person who can do Qurbani, as in he's got enough money to do Qurbani, but doesn't do Qurbani, he shouldn't come anywhere near our Musalla. As in, he shouldn't come to our Eidgah, shouldn't come to pray Eid, as in there's no Eid for a person who doesn't do Qurbani. So it's very important that we do the Qurbani and we understand what it's all about. And the other thing to remember is that Qurbani is wajib or compulsory upon everybody who has around 450 pounds of savings. So that doesn't mean you give one Qurbani for your house, you give one Qurbani for every person who's an adult, who's over the age of 14 or 15 and has that much money. They need to do Qurbani themselves. So they must do that. So in one house you should expect to have lots of Qurbanis, not just one Qurbani for the family. Everybody has to give Qurbani, and it's wajib upon you, as in compulsory. If you don't do it, you are sinful. And if there are years that you miss for some reason, then you must make those years up as well. So you can't just do it. You can't just forget about it. You have to do it. You'll be asked on the day of judgment. So if anybody has missed Qurbanis in the past because they didn't know, they need to think how many there were and offer those, or else you'll be held accountable for those. So why do we do Qurbani? That's the important thing to understand. Why does Allah Ta'ala want us to do Qurbani? And when you understand the reason for it, then you understand why we do Qurbani and how what we do nowadays isn't actually appropriate anymore. For example, Allah Ta'ala says it doesn't need the meat or the blood of the Qurbani. The whole purpose of the Qurbani is that you have piety, you have taqwa in your heart, you have fear of Allah Ta'ala, you have the consciousness of Allah Ta'ala. That you get close to Allah Ta'ala. That's the whole purpose of the Qurbani. It's about giving a sacrifice. It's not about spreading the meat to the poor. That's secondary. That's good if you do that, because they get fed. But the purpose of Qurbani is that you make the sacrifice. Because technically, if you wanted to, you could keep all the meat yourself at home and eat it. You don't have to distribute it. We distribute it because obviously it's good to distribute to the poor. If you have something, you should share it amongst others. That's the Muslim way. And the Prophet ﷺ in one hadith said that, if you're cooking something at home and the aroma goes to your neighbor, you should give them some of that food as well. So, we taught to share what we have, and by sharing, it's a sign of gratitude, and Allah Ta'ala will give you more. So we give that Qurbani to our family and friends, and we give it to the poor as well. But technically, you can keep it all yourself, and your Qurbani will be valid if you kept it all yourself. So you realize that giving it to the poor isn't the main purpose. The main purpose is actually making the sacrifice. And to understand the purpose of that sacrifice and what we're hoping to achieve from that sacrifice, we need to go to the roots of where this Qurbani came from. The Sahaba Ikram asked the Prophet ﷺ, what is this Qurbani we do? And the Prophet ﷺ said, it's a sunnat of your father Ibrahim alayhi salam. So all the Arabs, as we know, are descended from Ibrahim alayhi salam through Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam. That's the Prophet ﷺ, your father Ibrahim alayhi salam, the sunnat of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And we all know the great sacrifice that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam did. That when Allah Ta'ala asked him, and you got to remember, if you understand the emotions that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam must have gone through, when he was about to sacrifice his son, you realize the purpose of Qurbani and how that makes you a stronger Muslim, a better Muslim, and a better human being. Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Islam was given a son in very old age. Not when he was 20 or 30 or 40, but when he was very old age, when no one expected to have a son. Allah Ta'ala blessed him with a son. So you can imagine how happy he would have been with a son. Then when that son reached maturity, reached the age of 12, 13, became strong, could walk on his own 2 feet, could do what he wanted to do, at a time when he could help his father now, Allah Ta'ala ordered him to take him to the desert and sacrifice him for me, as in kill him for me. Now imagine that this is a son that you love. How much care and emotion have you got in that son? How much emotions are invested in that son, in that child? But because Allah Ta'ala told him to sacrifice, he accepted it. And he took his son. And Sayyidina Ismail al-Islam himself asked, where are we going? And when Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Islam told him what we were doing, Sayyidina Ismail al-Islam also accepted that, because it's what Allah Ta'ala wanted. So Sayyidina Ismail al-Islam and Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Islam was about to sacrifice. And when he was about to pull the knife across the throat, Allah Ta'ala replaced that immediately with a ram. So Allah Ta'ala saved Sayyidina Ismail al-Islam. But to all intents and purposes, Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Islam had sacrificed his son, because he had moved the knife. He had pushed the knife through the throat. It's just that at that moment Allah Ta'ala replaced it. And Allah Ta'ala showed that he didn't need the blood of Sayyidina Ismail al-Islam. What he wanted to show the world and to show everybody else was the obedience and the obedience of Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Islam. That's something he loved so much, he was prepared to do that. And that's how we need to understand ourselves. Can you imagine what Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Islam must have gone through, what he must have thought about, how he must have held his heart to pull that knife himself? Sometimes if you get somebody else to sacrifice it for you, it's a bit easier. But you yourself pulling that knife and drawing that knife on your own sons, that's what we should attain from our Qurbani as well. This is why when we give our Qurbani and we send our money away, that doesn't fulfill the whole purpose of that Qurbani. Because that's just like any other sadaqah. If you give £100, you give £200 for a Qurbani, you don't even see the animal, you have no emotions invested in the animal. It's just like normal sadaqah. But where's that emotion gone? This is why in the old countries, and what people used to do was that they'd rear the animal themselves for months and start to get connected with it and start to like it, start to love it, have emotional bond with it. And then for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, they would slaughter it and sacrifice it. And that's what we need to do. The Prophet ﷺ said that you should sacrifice the animal yourself. Because when you're sacrificing yourself, you're realizing what you're doing. And you're putting something on your heart. It's very difficult to do that, especially an animal that you've invested and loved so much. And if you can't do that, the Prophet ﷺ said to his daughter, Sayyidina Fatima radiallahu ta'ala, that stand next to the animal that is being sacrificed. So if you're not good enough or you don't know how to sacrifice an animal, because it is quite difficult, and there is a technique about it as well, that you need to get the right person to sacrifice the animal, because if they miss the main point and cut another vein or something else, that animal becomes haram because it's not being cut properly. But you should stand next to the animal, and you should have that investment in that animal. You should rear the animal up so that when you are sacrificing the animal, is it changing you? How did you feel when you did that? And if you didn't feel any emotions or nothing like that, then you missed the whole purpose of your Qurbani. As Allah Ta'ala said, it doesn't need the meat or the blood of the animal. The purpose of Qurbani is to get taqwa from you, is to get God consciousness from you, get piety from you, your obedience to Allah Ta'ala, so you can understand what you're doing. And that's the purpose of why we do this Qurbani. So you've got to ask yourself, we need to create that emotion in this country now. We've been here long enough now that we need to think about how we can sacrifice an animal here and recreate that emotion, because when you can do that, it strengthens your heart for everything else. If you can sacrifice something that you have so much emotion in for Allah Ta'ala, then all the other sacrifices that Allah Ta'ala asks you to make are much, much easier. So that's why we strengthen your heart. So for example, when you're training for something, you do the hardest thing during the training, so that when the real thing comes, it's easier because it's less more. So for example, if you see athletes, when they're running, they put weights on their body, put clothes with weights on, or they tie something behind their back, so that when they run, they're having that force. So when they're running in a competition, it's easier because they don't have that force. Similarly, when we do our Qurbani, the more you invested in that Qurbani, Then when another situation arises where you've got a challenge between right and wrong, you'll be strong enough to choose the right, even though it might hurt you, it might not be to your best interest that you think. You will choose the right thing because you know in the long term this is what Allah Ta'ala wants, and you believe that Allah Ta'ala has and knows that this is the best thing for you. One of the challenges that we will have in this country when we do Qurbani is that people will say, you're being cruel to animals. You know, you're sacrificing these animals, and how many animals are being sacrificed on this day around the world. So this again is a fallacy that we need to overcome and understand. One of the things is people say that more animals are sacrificed because of this day. Actually, they aren't if you think about it, because especially in the old countries, that people freeze the meat. So after you sacrifice the animal, you've got enough meat that you don't need to sacrifice any more animals for the next 2-3 months, because you've already sacrificed that many animals. And after you've eaten Qurbani meat for a few days, you don't want meat again, do you? So if anything, it's actually going to drop for a few days. So if you average it out over the year, you're probably not increasing the amount of meat that's sacrificed or slaughtered. And the other thing to remember is that if there wasn't this Qurbani, you wouldn't have the animals anyway. Because a lot of animals are reared for the Qurbani. Because we know, because rearing an animal is a lot of money. Because you have to look after it for years, and you have to feed it, you have to protect it, you have to look after it, you have to give it medicines, you have to make sure that nothing goes wrong with it. So that's a lot of investment. Now, if people didn't have that investment to come back, if they didn't know there was going to be Qurbani and these animals would be sold, why would people do that? So you wouldn't have that many animals in the first place anyway. So this creates that meat. It also shares the meat out amongst the people as well. And we all know meat is good for you. Not too much meat, but some meat is very good for you because people need the protein and they need the goodness from the meat. And through Qurbani, because we can't eat it all ourselves, we share that with others. We share that with poor people, especially in poorer countries. They couldn't afford to rear or create or bring up animals, but through the Qurbani system, they are able to share in that meat and have that meat, and they're given that. The other thing to remember is that the world is based on a food chain. For example, this is what animals do, we eat them. If we didn't eat the animal, and you didn't sacrifice the animal, what would happen to it? Would you just let it die? And if you just let it die and then bury it, that's a waste of the meat. And if you were doing it was letting them die and be buried, people will stop rearing animals. Because what's the point in that? So the whole cycle and the whole economy depends on those being sacrificed and slaughtered. And also from a spiritual point of view, you're actually doing a favor to the animal. The Prophet ﷺ said that these animals that you give in Qurbani, this is why you should give a good animal in Qurbani, the most beautiful animal that you can give. And there are rules around it that if there's something wrong with the animal, his legs are broken or his ears are ripped, or there's something wrong with it, you can't give that as Qurbani. It's got to be a perfect animal. Because on the day of judgment, that animal will go with you into paradise. So the animal that you have today, that you think you're sacrificing, that's actually going to be with you in paradise. That's one of the reasons why you try and rear it yourself. You have an emotional bond with that animal. So when you do sacrifice it, you know that I'm sacrificing it now, but for the greater good, this animal will be with us, inshallah, in paradise. And it will also be on your scales. And so obviously, the better the animal, the heavier the animal, you will get that much reward for that animal on the day of judgment. The Prophet ﷺ, for every hair on the animal, you will get a reward. So may Allah Ta'ala give us the ability to act upon this and understand the Qurbani. And people who haven't given Qurbani, they should give Qurbani ASAP. And if you haven't got the system here, then you have to give the money for somebody else to do the sacrifice for you. But ideally, we should think about making that sacrifice ourselves here, and so we can create that system, at least be able to see that. And the other thing to remember is, when you see the animal being sacrificed, and you see it die, and you see the blood gush out, you will realize the worth of the animal. And when you realize the worth of what you're doing, you won't waste meat. The problem we have today is that our kids, and we don't know where the meat comes from. We don't know what a chicken nugget is, or a chicken burger, or a beef burger. We just see it as anything. You don't realize that that's an animal. And when you realize that, you've taken a life there, you've taken a soul, you've spread the blood, then you value that meat. And if anything, you would then not eat that as much as you think you do, because you realize where that meat comes from. You realize the sacrifice and the pain that the animal went through for you to have that, and you will appreciate it. At the moment, we've got no difference of whether meat was grown on a tree or whether it's come from a living thing. We don't have that concept anymore. But when we see that concept with our own eyes, and you realize what you are doing and what you are consuming, you will appreciate that more, and you won't waste it more. As you can see, the hikmah and the wisdom that Allah Ta'ala has placed in this. 11 o'clock was our time, so we'll just pray our namaz now. May Allah Ta'ala give us the ability to give the Qurbani. So those who haven't, please do give your Qurbani. And may Allah Ta'ala accept our Qurbani from us all.